very vast form. It's not only a majority equity stake, but even through management agreement, shareholders agreements or voting agreement, a non-resident can have a control over an Indian company. And then there is a concept of ownership. Within ownership, there are two segments. Indian company owned by residents and Indian company owned by non-resident. Now what do you mean by Indian company owned by resident? Where more than 50% of the capital is beneficially owned by RICs, which is resident Indian citizen or companies owned and controlled by them. So if this is a situation, then that Indian company is owned by resident. Plus, there are additional sector-wise conditions. For example, in defense, apart from these conditions, there are other conditions that the resident also has to be a citizen of India, blah, blah, blah. So there are a few additional conditions which are there. Then what is an Indian company which is owned by non-resident? More than 50% of the capital is beneficially owned by non-resident. Now the word here used is capital, so it's not equity. So we may have to take into account the whole of the capital that is there in the Indian company. And obviously there is a control element which comes in through rights, voting rights and stuff like that. Now because of these two concepts of control and ownership, in sectors with in sectors or activities with cap, there could be a need for government approval, even though there may not be an FDI. There may not be actually fresh money coming in, or there may not be a transfer of shares. Now, which are these cases? These cases are if there is an Indian company established with foreign investment, but it is not owned and controlled by a resident entity. So that means there is a company which is established by foreign investment, but down the line there is a majority shareholding by a resident, but the ownership and control is not with the resident. In such cases, you will need an approval to run and operate that entity. Or there is a transfer of control or ownership. Sorry, if there is a control or ownership of an existing Indian company is being transferred to non-resident in any form, whether it is transfer of shares, whether it is fresh issue, whether it is amalgamation, whether there is any agreement, if there is any way in which in Indian companies in such sectors and activity, if there is a transfer of either the control or the ownership. So you can give up the control or the ownership without any underlying change in the share or any other thing. It may need an approval because the entire thing is now moving to the non-resident. The control of that activity is going to the non-resident. That's why you need a government approval. So people were trying to overcome sectoral caps by putting in less money but retaining control through agreements, stuff like that. So this is why this kind of nuances came in the policies. And now, unlike FDI, which is only Schedule 1, for indirect FDI and for control and ownership, all types of foreign investment is counted. Which means you may have FDI, you may have FII, you may have QFI, you may have NRIs, you may have ADR, GDR, FCCB, all types of instruments have to be counted, except Schedule 4, which is NRI investment on non-repatriation basis. So when you determine the control and ownership test for indirect FDI largely, or the transfers in a direct Indian company, you need to keep these concepts in mind. And there may be a need to go and take a government approval, even otherwise there may be everything else is in accordance with the regulation. Now let's look at downstream investment. So an Indian company can have indirect foreign investment if the investing Indian company has foreign investment in it. That means a non-resident has invested in an Indian company and that Indian company in turn has invested in the other Indian company. So the second Indian company has indirect foreign investment. Now what are the guidelines for these downstream investment or indirect foreign investment? So these guidelines currently, the way they are worded, apply only to Indian investor company which is owned and controlled by the non-resident entity. That means they do not apply to entities which are owned and controlled by resident. The downstream investment is subject to the same entry route condition as direct FDI. That means what you can do directly, you can do indirectly. What you can't do directly, you may not be able to do indirectly. And the computation of indirect FDI is as per a mechanism prescribed and it applies at each level. So you may go down, 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 and at each level you have to compute in the manner it is stipulated. And when there is a downstream investment, the investor company is required to notify their DIPP within 30 days, even if the instruments have not been allotted. So even if you have given mere money, you may be required to intimate. Then there is a requirement that if you are doing a downstream investment, the requisite funds have to come from overseas and you can't leverage domestic markets. You can't take borrowings in India and then invest downstream. However, downstream investment is permissible from internal accruals. Downstream investment by banking companies, these guidelines apply only to strategic investment and not their portfolio investments. Now friends, this is very interesting here. Responsibility of compliances of all downstream investment vests with the first level Indian company. So they have said that the first level of Indian company which is bringing in foreign investment has to certify that everything that's happening below it or all downstream investment made by it or that entity below are in compliance with the FDI policy. And the statutory auditor of that company has to mention this in his certificate that this is correct. And the directors have to confirm in the director's report. Now this is a requirement under the RBI guidelines. Imagine. This is something which came in fairly recently, but this is very important because a huge obligation is placed. You may actually end up certifying something 2-3 level down the line which is as such otherwise not relevant with the financial statement that you are auditing. And if the auditor's report is qualified, then it is required to be forwarded to the regional office of the RBI. So again, this is something which is very, very important for the practitioners around this table, because each one of us, if we are auditors and if our the entity which we are auditing has foreign investment, has made downstream investment, we have to certify this. So let's look at the mechanism of computing indirect investment. Now, this is not a simple mathematics, that you just take a simple apportionment. So let's look at, these are two diagrams over here. The foreign company has invested 49% in operating company. So there is a 49% direct FDI in the operating company. Now let's look at the other diagram on the right hand side. The foreign company has invested 49% in the Indian company. 51% is owned by RICs, which is either resident Indian citizen or companies owned by them, owned and controlled by them, both. And this Indian investing company has invested 75% in an operating company, and the 25% is held again by resident Indian. So here the law says that there is no indirect FDI because in the Indian investing company is owned and controlled by resident, because 51% is owned by resident, and assuming there is control also with that company, there is 75%, there is no indirect FDI which is flowing in the operating company. That means you don't have to take 49% of the 75% to be counted for indirect FDI. And many people are trying to actually interpret this policy to mean that now this operating company can do whichever activity that it wants, including retail trading, gambling, whatever, but which may strictly is not what the intention of the authorities was when they invented this. This was invented for some different purposes, but they seem to have now got into this legally, where the policy seems to suggest that if you were to structure your arrangement in this manner, perhaps at that operating company level, you may be able to get away with the sectoral restriction. But again, that's very risky, not advisable, and again, something which is being re-debated in the corridors. Let's look at a second scenario where there is a downstream investment by an Indian company which is owned and controlled by non-resident. So now instead of the 49% foreign ownership in the earlier example, foreign company is owning 51%, 49% is owned by a resident Indian citizen, and that Indian investing company has invested 75% in another operating company. Here the indirect FDI is 75%, the whole of the indirect FDI. So in the earlier example we have seen, because the foreign company is 49%, the indirect FDI in that 75% is 0. Whereas in this, the indirect FDI is now 75%. Because foreign companies owning more than 51% and hopefully controlling also the Indian investing company. Let's look at the third example here. Here the foreign company, again same as the second example, foreign company owning 51%, Indian residents owning 49%, and the downstream is 100%. Now here the entire 100% is not counted, like in the earlier example we had the whole 75% coming. Here the 51% is counted. Because the downstream is 100%, they are taking the FDI in the investing company as the indirect FDI. So when this is the vague madness or method that they have adopted in computing indirect FDI, it is strictly not an accounting or a mathematical gimmick. But this is what they have said. So if you are less than 49 FDI, downstream 0. If you are more than, you're owned and control, you count the whole investment so long as it is less than 100%. If it is 100%, you take the mirror foreign investment as the indirect FDI.
Would it not be governed by FIPB? Because under the investing company, the holding goes beyond 51%. Had it been a case of operating company instead of investing company, it would come under the automatic rule.
Yeah, that's correct. So
in this example, this foreign company is making an investment into investing company.
Yeah, but see, I'm not said that there is no operation over here. And in my first slide, I've said that holding companies will need FIPP approval. You're right. So if it's a pure holding company, it will need FIPP approval. But this is not strictly an example of a pure holding company. Just to show you the mechanism. That's it. That's correct.
So for the purpose of control, when we say that if there are certain special rights given by the shareholders agreement, so would we say having an affirmative vote is a right which will determine control?
Yes, I would think so.
Because affirmative will be with both resident and non-resident, so not either
So,
of the party can.
so you know the way the spirit of the guidelines is that when we are looking at ownership and control, the majority should be with the resident. Then only it is Indian owned and controlled.
So if it is equal.
If it is equal, then they are swinging it in favor of non-resident, saying it is owned and controlled by non-resident, owned or controlled by non-resident, and you fail the test.
Yes, because in most of the cases what happens is both have an affirmative.
Right. So that's not good enough. You will have to have the Indian resident have an edge or a higher affirmative vote, or he may have two, this guy may have one, then it is different. But if you have equal, then the policy swings in favor of the non-resident. That means it is not Indian owned and controlled, and therefore the test of indirect FDI applies in such case. Yeah, friends. So now with that, I have hopefully finished downstream investment, and let's move on to FDI and LLP, which actually came in through Press Note 1 of 2011 in May 2011, and after almost 3 years, that actually RBI notification came in. It's of March 2014, notification number 298, and in FEMA 20 we have this Schedule 9. You know, the RBI circular of April 2014, circular 123. Sort of, you know, brings in this operational, guidelines, and it is retrospective. So it sort of operates this guideline retrospective from the date the press note came in. So what is permitted in LLP? It is allowed only in sectors where 100% FDI is permitted under the automatic route. Sorry, first of all, FDI in LLP is permitted with prior FIPP approval. So you cannot have a situation of FDI and LLP without any FIPP approval. That means you need to always go to the FIPP and then operationalize an LLP with FDI. Now, what is permitted in LLP? It is allowed only in sectors where 100% FDI is permitted under the automatic route and there are no FDI linked performance conditions. That means it does not apply to sectors which are under the approval route or where there are sectoral compliance obligations. An example of such are development of township, NBFCs, construction. These types of activity will not qualify for FDI in an LLP. And if an Indian company with FDI wants to make a downstream investment into an LLP, even that company should only be engaged in activity which fall under the automatic route of FDI guidelines. And there should not be any performance related condition. And as per RBI guidelines, the onus is on the LLP. That means whether the investor in it is Indian investor is whether it is only engaged in a particular activity, that onus is on the LLP, not on the Indian company which is investing. Which is a little hard to digest, but that's the way it is. Now, what are the other points that FDI is not permitted in agriculture, plantation, print? They specifically clarified that this type of sectors will not be permitted. Again, certain types of investors like FII, FECI, QFIs, they will not be allowed to invest in an LLP. Then they said the designated partner has to be an Indian company or a person resident in India. So if you have to have a designated partner, if it is a foreign body corporate who incorporates an LLP, then the designated partner nominee should be a person resident in India. The capital contribution can again come like inbound investment, they come through inward remittances or NREFCNR for NRIs. The LLP is not allowed to make any downstream investment. So once you have an LLP, it can only be of one level, it is not allowed to go down. LLPs are not permitted to avail external commercial borrowing, and conversion of company into LLP is permitted. But again, while the RBI circular as well as the FDI press note talks about this, the whole operational mechanism of how it works is not given there. We will see in the next slide. So what are the key points which come out from the RBI guidelines is, again, they have, apart from the press note, they have built in the specific condition that it has to be, investor has to be an incorporated entity, citizens of Bangladesh, Pakistan again excluded, And they've given a specific exclusion for FIIs, FECIs, QFIs, FPIs, stuff like that. So those people who are taking recourse to portfolio investment, they will not be eligible for this kind of FDI and LLP. Now, they said that mere contribution to the capital is an eligible investment because typically an LP will not have a share certificate and the money can come in through inward remittance. And they said the investment can be by way of a profit share. That means what the policy seems to suggest is that the LLP will have two types of account, will be the capital account and the general profit and loss account. Whenever there is a transfer from the profit and loss account to the capital account, that will be treated like an FDI. And you will have to do your filings and compliances, and perhaps even in the application to the FIPP we may need to capture that whether there is an intention to take the capital back or there is that kind of recoupment that is done, and perhaps that clarity will need to be obtained at the approval stage itself. But then now, even if there is an issue of capital or there is a transfer of capital in an LLP, there are pricing guidelines. But again, these pricing guidelines are not exactly similar like pricing guidelines for shares. And they talk about any valuation norm as per internationally accepted or adopted market practice. Now, again, this is very surprising because I was just talking to somebody in the corridor today morning, and what I was trying to tell them is, look, the internationally accepted practices, the transaction is between two unrelated parties and there are no, as such, valuation required, but there are no valuation norms. And typically, if you look at any other practice, most international valuation will either go back to an EBITDA multiple, EPS multiple or DCF. These are hardly 2-3 methods, which the government could have very well specified and leave out the ambiguity, because rather than going into a mixture of three and then creating confusion, it would have been better had these points got clarified in the regulation. And friends, interestingly, apart from chartered accountant, even cost accountant and approved valuer from a government panel can carry out these valuations. Like under the inbound regulation, it is only the valuation can only be done by a chartered accountant or a merchant banker. Whereas here the valuation can be done by a chartered accountant, cost accountants have come in for the first time perhaps, and by an approved valuer from the central government panel. Then if there is an FDI and LLP, there is a reporting framework to the RBI regional office, very similar on lines with that for a company, receipt of capital, 30 days, there is a form. The form has such a long name, foreign direct investment LLP1. I don't know, the word foreign direct investment was not required. Nevertheless. So, you have to give your FIRCs, you have to give your KYC, you have to give your valuation certificate. When there is a divestment or a transfer of capital, another form, LLP2, is prescribed to be filed within 60 days. So your LLP1 is on par with FCGPR and LLP2 is on par with FCTRS. And RBI to allot a unique UIN number for each FDI that comes into the LLP. Then there are a few other conditions. I have discussed that. Designated partner, corporate or individual needs to be a resident under FEMA. So that designated partner is liable for penalty for LLP contravention. Now I think this perhaps came in here, I don't know why this came in here, but there is already a section 42 under the FEMA Act 1999 which says that for a contravention committed by companies or entities, the person responsible, and I do believe there was no need for a separate provision over here, but they have specifically specified that even the designated partner can be liable to contravention.
Sir, a question, pricing for investment acquisition and transfer. Now at the point of investment in the existing LLP by non-resident, then how would it be governed? Acquisitions and transfer can be understood that I'm acquiring LLP. I'm more specific on the valuation of the
transfer.
Yes. No, I'm more specific on the investment into existing LLP by person resident outside India. Because in the accounting terminology, what is infused is to be considered as a capital. So on valuation, then how does it really work? Because for acquisition it is fine. I'm acquiring, it's going to be the change of ownership and transfer is also understandable. But particularly, how does it really work for the pricing of investment into existing LLP?
No, so I think see, because there are no instrument over here, I think we'll have to put some logic in the, or you'll have to put some method in the madness. So I think what they are trying to say is that suppose there are two non-residents who invest, or there is one resident and one non-resident who invest, and say the joint venture is 50-50, and that business is valued say at 100 under the DCF method. Then both will need to bring in minimum 50-50 as capital. That's the way it ought to be. So if your share is 50%, you will bring in 50-50 as capital.
So that means it is automatically applied to the resident body.
Yes, your initial seed capital when you pump in,
I'm
it will
talking
be
about
50-50.
the existing LLP. Today I have formed the LLP
Yeah,
with
so-
the local partners. Tomorrow I'm
Yeah.
inviting.
Fine. So you value that LLP, whatever percentage you are giving him, that much capital as compared to the capital of the other, he has to bring in at the fair value.
Okay. So that
Because that's formula you have to inbuild. The
In
total
order to-
value is so much, total capital is now so much. With this capital for this percentage, the balance fair value for that percentage is so much, and that is
So
what is
in a way it applies to resident holding also.
No. The resident holding is taken as a base for the non-resident. You will have to perhaps bring in a premium as well. So you really can't actually look at the resident because the resident may have invested way back, so that value has gone up for him. So suppose the resident has already invested 100, now the fair value is 1000, and you want to give 50%, then the other guy will have to bring in 500. The resident whatever invested is not relevant.
Okay. So that 50% shareholding or partnership stake with the 500.
Yeah. That's how it ought to be. That's how. So you will have to actually marry the valuation principle, the legal principle, and you will have to logically work it out.
How fair valuation into the value of the property to other?
So that is what they have said as per any international accepted market practice. So you will have to go to that. Now if the fundamental reason of doing the deal is the immovable property for whatever in that deal. So typically in a running business you don't revalue the property. Typically, and this is only in sectors which are 100% auto route. So typically value will not come from property because real estate and other things are not permitted. So technically real estate should not influence this valuation. That's at least what I believe in most of the cases. It's only a theoretical question.
So you have mentioned one thing that designated partner should be a resident.
Yes.
Okay, so it means that non-resident cannot be a partner in LLP.
So he can be a partner, but if he wants to be a designated partner, or if you want to designate somebody, that person has to be a resident. So LLP can be 100% foreign owned. He'll make an individual as a designated partner as a nominee. That person has to be a resident.
So he would be authorized to sign.
Yeah, he will be authorized to sign. That's correct.
And whatever the contribution comes, it should come in form of the capital only, not in form of unsecured loan from the partner.
No, it is not allowed. No. That is because that will be like an ECB. From a shareholder, if you take a loan, it's like an ECB, which is not permitted.
Here ECB is not permitted.
That's correct. So you have to take it like a capital only, and repayment of capital will be like a buyback. So again, at pricing and everything will apply.
So initial contribution, for example, I want to form one LLP, for example, for a trading purpose. The NRI is one partner and resident is another partner. He is holding 75% and 25% to be held by the Indian resident.
Yeah.
Now, how to value that? Suppose there is a contribution of say 1 million, want to start the business. 75% comes from each side, 25% from the Indian resident. So, is it at the book value only initially we have to bring and start the LLP, or valuation we have
No, that's what I'm saying. You'll have to do the valuation. And as per the valuation, whatever is the fair value for that contribution, you will have to invest.
But in case of a company formation, this kind of evaluation is not applicable, I believe so.
Yeah, so that's what you'll have to. That's why they have. So really, they have very smartly not gone into something like DCF or whatever. You see, you will have to decide what are you in a partnership. You value the whole business. Okay, with the seed capital that is going to come in, either the existing capital plus the fresh capital. And then you attribute the whole value, and then whatever percentage you are giving for that percentage, that much value is to bring in as capital. That's what the example I gave.
So we have to make a business valuation in the beginning
Yes.
of this for
Yes.
next 5 years, 10 years, whatever.
So again, this is subject to testing by a valuation expert because these are just coming. I'm again not a valuation expert, but this is at least my view. Perhaps there is, if you have to read a method into this matter, this is one approach which should be palatable to the authorities as well as the valuer.
But in case of LLPs, would you be allowed to give interest on the capital?
So again, that is, if it's a capital, there is no interest under the FDI policy. Remember one thing, interest is allowed only in the case of ECBs. So technically, as of now, there is no clarity whether.
But even in the company route, when you bring in the compulsory convertible debentures, which
Yeah, so that's an instrument, and that's an instrument. So here there is no instrument. Please understand. Here there is no capital which is like a loan, and there is no capital which is like a capital. So as of now, at least, unless there is a more clarity which comes in either in the FAQ or you ask RBI. So right now, you don't need. Perhaps you may not be able to pay interest on capital. Perhaps. Because the capital is like a pure equity there. There is no instrument like a debt over there in that capital. In the guidelines, they have not made that distinction. Unlike in bond, where CCD has been defined to be forming part of the FDI policy as well as a share and like a capital. There is no such expansion of capital definition here. Now the issue is, and again the whole thing is, so that will, at least the way at least I read it, again I am very strict in my reading, quite conservative. The way I read it, capital will remain like a base capital. There is no way to recharacterize it into anything else. Perhaps I may need to seek clarity from RBI. If they permit, we may give. And the way I see is RBI may permit only if there is a profit. See, the way RBI looks at it, if you have profits, these are like current account transaction, you take it out. Because that interest on capital is an income tax fiction. It is not a legal fiction in that sense. Basically, because of the deductibility, many people would like to pay interest on capital. But that deeming fiction is not carried in the other law, like FEMA. We will probably need to do some more homework as to how we to bring in. Yeah, any other questions? I'm doing good on time. So friends, with that we actually go through some sectoral issues. What are some of the challenges that some of these sectors are facing? So if you look at wholesale trading, cash and carry wholesale trading, whichever way you call it, or wholesale trading as you call it. The main pain point here is the ceiling of 25% on the total turnover of the wholesale venture with respect to sales between group entities. So essentially this rigor was brought in the policy to actually stop the front end, back end that was happening, and most of you may be familiar that many foreign retailers have directly or indirectly started retail trading by putting an Indian joint venture partner in a fund and having a wholesale venture in the back end. And therefore they came in with this 25% condition that you can only sell 25% from that wholesale back-end structure to the front-end retail structure owned by resident. But the whole point is, while this policy has come in, the definition of group company is very funnily worded, because if you see that definition says two or more enterprise which are directly or indirectly in a position to exercise 26% or more voting rights in the other enterprise, appoints more than 50% of the members of the board of directors in the other enterprise. So it seems to suggest that there is a parity, that means one investing in the other and the second investing in the other. Now if there are cases of sister concern, for example, if the Indian partner has invested through sister concern, then technically this test may fail. So again, while they try to capture it, and people are now afraid to apply any other interpretation to these word groups, but it's not very happily worded, and a lot of people have sought clarification whether in that kind of structure, whether a sister concern and not really directly or indirectly, a control, whether those kind of structures may get covered, Because you can have rights into each other only if you are directly holding, In a typical sister concern, you will not have that rights. Now, single brand retail trading for FDI beyond 51%, there is a mandatory sourcing of at least 30% of the value of products sold from, preferably from, small industry, villages, artisan, craftsmen, MSME. Now the guidelines says preferably to be sourced from. Now what do you mean by preferably sourcing? What do you mean? If you can source, you can do. If you can't source, you should not do. What is it, And then there is no clarity on what if these conditions are not met in the 5-year stipulated period, Because this is a cumulative condition. This 30% sourcing condition has to be satisfied on an average in a group of 5 years. Then there is a confusion whether most of the wholesale companies, existing wholesale trading companies, want to actually start a single brand retail trading division. There is currently a confusion as to whether they would be allowed to carry on both the activities simultaneously, whether the sourcing will apply on both. There is a huge confusion out there. Some of the earlier approvals given by the FIPB seems to suggest yes, it can be carried out. Some of them have been denied. Some of them are currently under hold. Some of them we asked to give a declaration, you will not do it. So again, there is absolutely lack of clarity at the policy level in terms of how this would be evolved. And again, the greatest heartburn here is that you are not allowed to do retail trading through e-commerce. So again, that's been our greatest demand, that if you are anyway, you keep an inventory, if you are selling in the store, why can't you have a website where a person can order online, and why can't it be delivered from the store? So again, this is something which currently SBRT sector is struggling with.
Then how does the structures like Amazon work?
Shabir,
yeah.
on clarification, DIPP had come out with a clarification itself wherein they stated that the wholesale trading as well as retail cannot be done in the same Indian investing company?
No, but they have given in the past. They are going to and fro that. I know that. They are not adhering to it. They are not adhering. I have recently given a declaration in one application that we will not do wholesale trading.